with a staggering 5% of Black associates and an unprecedented 2.3% of partners being Black in 2021. There's evidently a tsunami of Black lawyers storming the halls of large law firms. I mean, how could white men possibly stand a chance in this deluge? While some white voices, struggling to be heard over this apparent avalanche, are expressing their angst about the unendurable discrimination they're facing, the real question remains, with all this emphasis on diversity in hiring first years at law firms, why don't we see more Black faces in those elite partner portraits on the office walls? Is diversity just a stylish word firms throw around at galas to get more big corporate clients? Enter stage right, Edward Blum, the conservative linchpin behind the Supreme Court's decision to nix race-conscious affirmative action in college admissions. Now, with unwavering focus, he's zeroed in on law firms. He set his legal sights on 2 firms in Texas and Florida that offer fellowships for diverse candidates. Texas and Florida, the perfect venues given the ever-present shadow of conservative fear looming large, stoked by the alarming notion that Black people might be slowly coming to a realization. Despite the welcoming smiles during interviews, the system might be set to oust them just a few years down the line. Oh, the treachery, it's almost poetic. Really, bring them in for the optics, then subtly nudge them out. Maybe, just maybe, diversity is and has always been merely lip service. Or perhaps the system, with its historical roots in exclusion and supremacy, is just functioning as designed. Perish the thought that the 2.3% Black people representation is a tad too generous, given a past where laws for hundreds of years brazenly banned Black individuals from the legal sector. In the midst of this theater, Black individuals might start pondering, if this system, so vehemently protective of its status quo, can accommodate them, then perhaps it's time to construct an alternate stage, a space where they are not mere tokens, but the scriptwriters, directors, and stars. If the current system feels so threatened, maybe it's best to let them revel in their own creation. After all, it was fashioned precisely for them anyway. Perkins Coie, according to the lawsuit, has been outrageously trying to promote diversity for decades. They've offered fellowships to students of color, LGBTQ+ identifying students, and students with disabilities. Imagine paying these students to work and then potentially offering them well-paying positions. The humanity. Morrison Foerster is also on Blum's radar. Their Keith Wetmore Fellowship for Excellence, Diversity, and Inclusion only considers, and I quote, African American, Black, Latinos, Native Americans, Native Alaskans, and or members of the LGBTQ+ community. Their 10-year-old program has so far extended a whopping 136 fellowships. These lawsuits follow closely on the heels of the Supreme Court's overturning of nearly 50 years of race-conscious affirmative action in colleges. This new frontier apparently makes Blum confident in his stance against the firms, claiming that the rights of non-disabled, straight white men in law schools are being violated. But let's not forget, law firms have historically and continue to struggle with diversity. Despite the outcry, white men still largely rule the roost, especially in the plush corner offices reserved for partners. The most recent stats from the National Association of Law Placement suggest a mere uptick in representation for lawyers of color in entry-level roles, from 20% to 28% over a decade, and Black associates are still sitting at around 5%. And remember, people of color is not the same as Black. As of 2021, only 4% of all partners in law firms were women of color, and a merely 2.3% of them were Black. The assertion of reverse discrimination is deeply embedded in a system that has never genuinely addressed the injustices done specifically to Black people. Historically, America has passed race-neutral laws that, on the surface, sought to halt the brutal and traumatic treatment of Black individuals. However, these laws often did little to rectify the actual underlying systemic prejudices. They served merely as band-aids on wounds that required intensive care. The trauma endured by Black communities is not just an abstract notion but has tangible neurological implications. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, a critical brain region responsible for executive functions such as decision-making and emotional regulation, can be adversely affected by trauma. Black people have definitely been traumatized by America. When communities are consistently subjected to trauma, their collective neurological health can be compromised, perpetuating a cycle of adversity. Ironically, the nation that should be promoting healing and prevention perpetuates this cycle, using legislation like the Civil Rights Act in ways that unintentionally inflict more trauma under a race-neutral guise. Blum's lawsuits boldly claim that these firms are contravening the Civil Rights Act of 1866, a piece of legislation that aimed to prohibit racial bias in private contracts. His ultimate vision is clear-cut: erase the footprint of race and ethnicity from the arenas of employment, contracting, and internships. Blum's mantra rings out: we believe that an individual's race and ethnicity should not be used to help that individual or harm that individual in his life's endeavors. Such a beautiful and harmonious sentiment, isn't it? But let's take a moment to reflect on America's rich tapestry. intricately woven with threads of racial division. If one were to see the interworking of this American system, you could see that it actually runs seamlessly, perpetuating disparities as intended. The push to eliminate race from consideration might seem noble, yet it paradoxically thrusts race into sharper focus, especially when one remembers that the predominant decision makers at these law firms are white men. By seeking to sideline race, there's a sly undercurrent of reinforcing its importance, all under the watchful eyes of those who have historically wielded the power. Oh, the genius of it all. Please purchase my recent book entitled Prompt Mastery on Amazon. Scan this QR code. This is Sean Speaks AI assistant reminding you that brain health is mental wealth.